Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to the session on quantifying uncertain migration scenarios. So my name is Jakub Bijak, and I will be chairing this session. This is a session organized by the Quantifying project and led by University of Southampton and executed in collaboration with 7 other institutions from Europe and from Canada. So on the program, we have 8 talks. They will be played in a single pre-recorded block, which will take about an hour's time, and then we'll have a discussion with Q&As after the whole block. So the individual papers will be introduced in my brief introduction to the session and played at the beginning of the recording. So just to say welcome, thanks for joining us, and enjoy the program. And we very much look forward to your questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to session 111, Quantifying Uncertain Migration Scenarios. My name is Jakub Bijak, and I have the pleasure to chair the session and also to lead the Quantifying project, Quantifying Migration Scenarios for Better Policy, funded from the European Union's Horizon 2020 program. QuantMig is executed by a consortium of 7 European migration research institutions, led by the University of Southampton from the United Kingdom, and including Danube University Krems and International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis from Austria, Population Euro from Germany, the Netherlands Interdisciplinary Demographic Institute from the Netherlands, as well as Peace Research Institute Oslo and the University of Oslo, both from Norway. The Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique from Canada is an external partner of the project. The overarching aim of QuantMig is to produce comprehensive, multiple perspective and robust quantitative migration scenarios to support various areas of European migration policy. To do that, we aim to make advances in conceptualizing, explaining and predicting migration. And 2 central themes of the project are the uncertainty and the complexity of migration and how to deal with them. In our work, we look at 2 main types of migration uncertainty. The epistemic one, related to our limited knowledge of migration processes, which can be reduced through better knowledge, and aleatory uncertainty, which is the intrinsic uncertainty about the processes and the future, irreducible and unknowable. Examples of both are shown on the slide. In QuantMig, we try to shed light on some elements of the former epistemic kind of the uncertainty, while also providing advice and suggestions on how to manage the second, aleatory type, which is the more difficult task. With high-impact events contributing to the rapid changes in the directions, magnitude and composition of migration flows, there is increasing demand for robust tools to aid migration-related decision-making at different levels, from operational responses to strategic policy developments. The aim of this session is to present several key elements of a staged process of creating migration scenarios, and to illustrate them by using examples of European migration which we developed as part of the QuantMig project. We focus on 3 areas: conceptualizing and analyzing migration drivers, evaluating and estimating migration data, as well as constructing and analyzing migration scenarios. In this session, we will have 7 presentations, lasting for about an hour in total, and then we will have half an hour for questions and discussion. After this short introduction, the session will comprise 3 talks about migration drivers, 2 talks about migration data and estimates, and 2 on the development and analysis of migration scenarios. These talks will illustrate how we approach the creation of a coherent storyline behind the scenario building process, from the conceptual and empirical foundations to describing the possible migration futures and their uncertainty. So, in the first conceptual talk, Matthias Czajka from the Danube University Krems will talk about migration decision-making under the conditions of uncertainty, and his presentation will identify and discuss 4 key dimensions of such migration decision processes. As an example of those, in the second talk, Valentina Diazio from the University of Southampton will discuss the pull factors of migration from the microeconomic perspective, focusing on how policy uncertainty and natives' attitudes towards immigrants influence migration flows. The third talk, given by Heidrun Bonnet from Danube University Krems, will look at the spatial and categorical interdependence of European migration flows. In the part of the session focused on data and estimates, Rafael Costa from the Netherlands Interdisciplinary Demographic Institute will present the online inventory of European migration data, which we prepared within the Quantifying project, together with a comprehensive quality assessment. In the second talk from this group, Georgios Aristotelous from University of Southampton will present the current status of the work on estimating migration flows, both within Europe and between European countries and regions of the world, by using a Bayesian hierarchical model. The last part of the session, looking at migration scenarios, will start with a talk by Michael Bosunou from NIDI, who will present a review of the approaches for setting the scenarios of future migration to Europe, including the work currently done in Quantifying. And finally, Emily Barker from the University of Southampton will talk about the different ways of analyzing the uncertainty of migration scenarios through empirical and theoretical macroeconomic models. So once again, welcome to this session. We hope you will enjoy the presentations, and we very much look forward to the discussion and answering your questions after the talks. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthias Scheiker from Danube University Krems, and it is my pleasure to present our paper on migration decision making and its key dimensions, which is co-authored together with Jakub Biszak and Toby Brike from the University of Southampton. This conceptual contribution has been written as part of the ongoing Horizon 2020 project Quantifying, which aims to quantify migration scenarios for better policy. Migration decisions are made in the context of personal needs and desires, and the individuals making decisions about moving or staying face uncertainties regarding the possible outcomes of such decisions. Information about future opportunities is incomplete, and whether migration turns out to be a personal success or failure depends mostly on circumstances that are ex ante unknown and ex post not fully under the control of the individuals who migrate. So for instance, imagine a government worker in Afghanistan who is trying to make sense of whether she should try to leave the country given the recent regime change, or a 20-year-old son of a subsistence farmer in Honduras who is considering whether he can contribute to the better fortunes for his family by trying to find a job in the US. Our paper elaborates theoretically about such decisions by developing first a typology of migration decision making, including 4 fundamental dimensions: the formation of migration aspirations, the cognitive rules for searching and evaluating information about migratory options, the timing and planning horizons for preparing and realizing migratory decisions, and the locus of control and degree of agency in making migration decisions. The last dimension addresses the question of who makes the migration decision. Is it individuals, groups, or, for example, external institutions? These 4 aspects are conceptually separate, as shown on this 4-dimensional migration decision space. At the same time, as we will discuss later in this talk, in real-life decisions, some of these dimensions interact. For example, more information about migration opportunities in combination with a strong internal locus of control can enable longer planning horizons. We discuss these dimensions in more detail on the next few slides. People of all countries and cultures aspire to life satisfaction, well-being, or simply the good life. We conceptualize aspirational gaps, that is, a mismatch of aspired and actual life circumstances, as the internal cognitive driver activating a personal reflection, desire, and decision-making process on migration. Aspirational gaps as the difference between the state of need satisfaction and individual aspirations are a precondition for considering migration as a viable option. While some long-term life goals might take years to evolve, other aspirations evolve and change arguably a lot faster and in response to unfulfilled individual needs. Beyond immediate needs, people's aspirations are further influenced by their personality, their socialization, and education, all constituting elements of a personal capacity to aspire, which refers to the capacity to imagine a life that is superior but still achievable compared to the current status quo. This capacity to aspire is multidimensional and nurtured by a person's economic, social, emotional, and cognitive resources. Moreover, aspirations are not static, but they may change dynamically through external stimuli, such as peer group interaction, social comparisons of one's own status quo with life situations of relevant others, observation of other ways of living, or simply by exposure to information that is transmitted by media and social networks. The endogenous nature of aspirations is often reflected by the fact that aspirations after migration are usually not the same as before, but often adapted through exposure to new, so far unknown lifestyles and environments at the place of residence. People may also adapt their life and migration aspirations by incorporating migration experiences of others through social comparisons and role modeling. Thus, aspirations may not only adapt through one's own experience, but also by learning about the achievements, failures, and states of well-being of others. In the context of migration decision-making, information search is both a multi-stage and multi-dimensional process. Knowledge and information about migration opportunities are important prerequisites for the formation of migration aspirations and also influence subsequent migration decisions. Additionally, people do not objectively collect and assess information, meaning that perceptions, expectations, feelings, and emotions all have important and highly influential roles to play. There's a huge breadth of information which is potentially relevant for migration decisions. Given cognitive limitations, human beings are not able to optimally collect and assess this information when making decisions of high relevance, such as migration, and therefore will likely need to rely on heuristics or rules of thumb to evaluate and select migration-related information. Migration decisions are made at a specific time in people's life, but also take time to follow through. Migration is usually preceded not only by the decision, but also by a period of planning and preparations. Some insights into this stepwise process of decision-making can be offered by psychological theories, for example, the theory of planned behavior proposed by Eisen. At the same time, decision makers anticipate what can be gained by migrating in the future, implicitly taking into account time preference and intertemporal discounting. These decisions are thus time-dependent as well as space-dependent. Another aspect of migration decisions is related to individual time, that is, to where the agents are situated on their respective life course trajectories. This can be seen in the typical age-dependent migration patterns as described by the Rogers-Castro curves, but also by migration and mobility patterns that are linked to other events that happen to individuals, such as childbearing, employment, changing income prospects, and so on. The final dimension in our typology is the locus of control and level of self-determination in migration decision-making. Here again, we posit the existence of a spectrum. On one end are highly autonomous decisions made chiefly by the migrants themselves. This then moves to more group-based decisions, such as migration decisions made in consultation with the broader family or household unit. And then there are factors beyond the behavioral or decision-making capacity of the individual. That is, factors with an external locus of control, such as the broader social and political forces that also exert influence on migration decisions. The level of self-determination also interacts with time and aspirations, so that an internal locus of control is associated with higher aspirations, longer time planning, and decision horizons. An emerging hypothesis, which requires further empirical investigation, is that a key underlying factor influencing all four dimensions of migration decisions is individual attitudes toward risk and uncertainty. Across several studies, researchers have found that those who migrate are generally more tolerant of risk and uncertainty than those who do not migrate. However, recent research on migration away from conflict zones has found the opposite pattern, with those who stay showing greater risk tolerance than those who migrate, highlighting the important role of context for migration decisions. Despite the focus of different strands of research on aspects such as aspirations, information, temporality, or human agency in decision-making, the fact that these dimensions are closely interconnected has hardly been addressed. We also know relatively little about how emotions and gut feelings interfere with cognitive processes when it comes to evaluating and ultimately making decisions. Let me conclude this talk by saying that the conceptualization of migration decisions is still underdeveloped. For instance, links between attitudes to risk and the 4 dimensions of a migration decision-making process are certainly in need of further and deeper empirical investigation. In particular, the interconnectedness of these dimensions has hardly been addressed and is left for future conceptual and empirical work. But other questions also remain unaddressed, such as how is the formation of aspirations associated with the life cycle and the access to certain informational and educational resources? Or how is the locus of control and degree of agency interlinked with life cycle stages, but also the quality and quantity of information available to take self-determined decisions? Or, for instance, if the locus of control is rather external, how does this link with the individual versus collective aspirations when it comes to migrating? Please find more detailed elaborations of this topic in our working paper, which you can find on the Quantmic project website under www.quantmic.eu. A revised version of this paper is forthcoming as part of a special issue on migration and cognition in the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your comments and suggestions.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Valentina Diasio, and I'm working on the work package 3 of the Quantmic project. This work package is led by Professor Jacqueline Waba. In this talk, I'm going to give you a general overview of the work package and to explain you more in details the work that we have been doing so far. Our work package is focused on the destination countries. In particular, we aim at offering a better understanding of the drivers of migration to Europe, and so which are the economic and non-economic factors that could deter or attract migration to the European countries. In this presentation, I will focus on the 2 issues that we have tackled so far. The first one is to understand how uncertainty in migration policy may influence migration. And the second one is to analyze the role of natives' negative attitudes. Our first deliverable is focused on uncertainty and assess the impact of policy uncertainty on migration flows. We use the Brexit referendum as a quasi-experimental setting and implement a difference in difference strategy that allows us to establish a causal relationship between policy uncertainty and migration. In particular, we focus on the period between the Brexit referendum and the end of 2019. So, when Brexit was still not in place, but the yes was already voted, and there was a lot of uncertainty on how migration movements between the UK and the EU would be regulated. This uncertainty not only affected the new potential immigrants coming from the European Union, but also EU citizens that were already residents in the UK and they did not know whether their rights would have remained unchanged after the Brexit. As the referendum only casted uncertainty for the freedom of movement between the UK and the European Union, while the rights of other EU citizens remained unchanged and they could continue to move freely within the European Union, we also assess whether the policy uncertainty in the UK increased the relative attractiveness of other EU countries and diverted migration flows from the UK to alternative destinations in the European Union. What we find is an overall negative impact of the Brexit referendum on UK migration. meaning that we find that the uncertainty has decreased the inflows of people from EU coming to the UK and increased the outflows of EU migrants from the UK. In other words, uncertainty has deterred new migrants from the EU countries to move to the UK and encouraged the ones who were already resident in the UK to leave. We then look at the stocks, and what we find is that those are still growing, but at a slower pace than before. This suggests that the effect of the referendum was not sufficiently strong to reverse the ongoing trend that was increasing for the stocks. And since stocks measure net migration, this makes us conclude that the inflows of the EU from the EU continue to be greater than the outflows even after the effect of the referendum. When we look at the effect of the referendum on other EU countries, we do not find any significant effect, and this suggests that the referendum did not really divert the inflows of EU migrants from the UK to other European destinations. Our second deliverable focuses on the impact of natives' negative attitudes on migration inflows to the EU countries. This is a very interesting issue to study, as in the last few years we saw a surge in anti-migration attitudes towards migrants and especially in Europe. Also, while many studies have focused rather on the determinants of natives' attitudes towards immigration, very little is known about the link between migration inflows and attitudes. This is especially due to some technical issues in establishing causality between the two. We attempted minimizing the issue of reverse causality in several different ways. First, for this analysis, we have a panel dataset that covers the period between 1995 and 2018, and this allows us to use a one-year lag for all the explanatory variables. Second, we control for economic and geographic drivers to minimize the risk of omitted variables and also to be able to compare the relative magnitude of the effect of the attitudes. Third, and most importantly, we adopt an instrumental variable strategy and account for the dependence among destinations by introducing in the model a series of fixed effects. Our findings suggest that anti-migration attitudes have a negative and significant impact on migration inflows to EU countries. We find also that the overall effect is larger for migrants coming from non-EU countries than migrants coming from other EU countries. In terms of elasticity, if we compare the effect of negative attitudes with the effect of other economic drivers, as for instance income and unemployment, we find that this is smaller for attitudes but still significant and non-negligible. Here in the graph, we show the comparison between the coefficient of attitudes and unemployment, and we can see that the coefficient of attitudes is about the half of unemployment. If we do the same comparison only by focusing on EU migrants, we find that the elasticity is higher, meaning that the effect of attitudes relative to other economic drivers is higher for EU migrants who may be relatively more discouraged by negative attitudes. This is particularly important and especially for EU policy, as it suggests that negative attitudes might constitute a hurdle for intra-EU mobility. We hope that our work has helped in providing a better understanding of the drivers of migration, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I will be glad to hear your comments and questions.
Hello everyone. I'm presenting today a paper on the spatial and categorical interconnectedness of European migration flows. As you all know, there are basically 4 legal pathways to enter the European Union. So first, we have labor, second, family, third, education, and fourth, asylum. And our research question is, how and to what extent are these 4 different migration flows spatial and categorical interconnected? With spatial dependence, we mean here how flows of a certain legal category category across geographic proximate countries of origin or destinations are interlinked. And for category dependence, we mean here how are flows of different legal categories interlinked, so to which extent and in what way. Here you see actually data what we are using, migration from 2008 to 2019 for first residence permits from Eurostat. And you can see clearly here, for example, the peak of the asylum for the refugee crisis. And we will divide it here because of that also the time frame into these 3-year periods. So the question is now how these different flows are interlinked. So what has been put out there so far? What do we know? Well, first of all, although there's a large body of literature on the migration drivers, there's actually empirical evidence absent kind of the interlinkages between these different flows. And while there are criticism on fixed migration flows such as asylum, because it doesn't really reflect the complex migration flow nature, it has not been tested to a large scale how these different flows are interconnected. And while it's assumed that there is spatial and category substitution effects, it has been not analyzed simultaneously and for multiple migration categories, only so far for one type and into irregularity. So we want to fill this gap. But what are actually the theoretical arguments for spatial dependence? Well, overall, it has been shown that migration policies can actually have unintended side effects because, of course, migrants have agency and can either follow the rules or defy them. So they might opt actually for different migration pathways. And restrictive policies can actually also affect neighboring countries. So, for example, increasing immigration by France and Belgium in the 1970s contributed to the diversification of destination of Moroccan immigrants, for example, to Spain and Italy. And we all know that migrant networks are very crucial for facilitating migration, but not only from the origin country, but also from neighboring country. So, for example, not just important the Ghanaian community, but the whole Western African community. And here, of course, we assume that migration dependence is particularly likely where their countries are similar and share common language. And this is often the case when they're spatially proximate. So, categorical dependence, we already mentioned the case of that shown that migrants can move into irregularity, but also actually for restriction on labor can defer potential migrants to opt for family or asylum. This has been actually shown also for high-skilled migration, for example, in the United States, because the quotas have been not that large. And even in our paper, we have shown that for Latin American countries, for example, the migration flow comes from labor to family. So we hypothesize here as well that there is categorical dependence and, for example, particularly between labor and family. So how do we test this? Well, we use the data which I presented before. The unit of analysis is diet periods, the economic and refugee crisis, before and after. Dependent variables are these 4 migration flows. And of course, because we want to test spatial dependence, have the spatial lags, use several fixed effects, and use seemingly unrelated regression for that. So coming to results. Here the table you see on the top, the results for spatial dependence, and then the bottom for category dependence for the 4 different migration flows. And just overview seeing the whole table, that the estimate shows statistically significant effects. So we can generally say that spatial and categorical dependence can be confirmed. If we're looking more closely here, for the example with the red circle showing for asylum migration, so a 10% increase in asylum flows from proximate countries increases asylum flows from a country of origin by about 3.7%. And spatial dependence on the destination side, now for the green circle, here's education, the strongest. For example, within the EU, a large inflow of education migrants into Germany, for example, result into lower flows of educational migrants into Austria, so a neighboring country of Germany. So therefore, flows from a specific country of origin are rather negatively associated and splitting between EU destinations. In the other case, it was more complement. So the more, for example, asylum comes from Syria into Germany, the more also from neighboring countries, for example, from Lebanon into Germany. Now looking at categorical dependence, which is here below, in general, we see a significant effect. And the strongest one here for family and labor, which makes sense if thinking or knowing that mainly labor policies, the family reunification on this area is the most liberal, and thus showing also here a very strong effect, and that migrants in this area will follow. And generally for family, we see that they are all linked to all other categories as would be expected, because they are legally also generally connected. So in conclusion, we can say migration flows are neither spatial nor categorically independent. The larger migration flows of one legal category, the larger the flows of migrants from the same type of geographical close origin countries moving the same EU destination. But a larger inflow of migrants of one type results in lower inflows of the same type into other proximate EU destinations. For instance, if labor migration from Senegal increases in France, it is reduced in Germany. Yet as Senegalese labor migration increases in France, so does as well increase Moroccan or Gambian labor migration into France, as these countries are geographically proximate. So policy need to be aware of these side effects the policy intervention might have if they want to achieve their intended policy objective. So spatial and category dependence should not be ignored. Thank you very much.
In this talk, I'm going to present two tools that have been developed within the Quantifying project by the NIDI team, a data inventory and a quality assessment of European migration data. This work was led by Jaro Moyaert and Elge de Valk, also in collaboration with colleagues from the Danube University Krems and from the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research. Good quality quantitative data on migration are essential for research and policy making. They are crucial to understand current trends and to anticipate future migration. And in the Quantifying project, we make extensive use of migration data to study patterns and drivers of migration in Europe and to estimate future scenarios of migration using microsimulation. In order to prepare and evaluate the data for analysis and modeling, we developed two tools. First, we made an inventory of datasets containing recent migration data, and second, we carried out a quality assessment of European migration data. These tools lay the basis of our work in Quantifying, but more than that, they can also be valuable resources for researchers studying European migration and searching for appropriate data. In this presentation, I'm going to give an overview of these two tools. The first tool is the Quantifying Migration Data Inventory that we made in collaboration with colleagues at the Danube University Krems. A number of data inventories have been made in the past, but there was a clear need for an updated and more inclusive overview of the migration data landscape. An important addition of our work is that we include different types of data, both survey and administrative data, in one inventory. Building upon existing metadatabases and data from international organizations, we constructed a new metadatabase offering a structured overview and access to the data sources that allow the study of migration to, from, and within Europe. Its purpose is not only to catalog existing data sets on migration, but also to provide key information on each data set in a searchable and accessible way. The metadata database covers 143 data sets. It has a focus on European migration data from the last 2 decades and provides a comprehensive overview of all types of datasets, from large administrative data to relatively small-scale surveys. It also contains a quality assessment of each dataset based on objective criteria, namely the geographical coverage, the presence of migrant characteristics, the completeness of the dataset, that is the amount of missing data, the disaggregation by type of migrants, and the time lag between the data collection and publication. This metadatabase is openly available in a user-friendly, browsable website. The website contains filters that allows the users to search through the inventory. It gives links to the datasets themselves and to related documentation and reports, and the user can easily download the results of their search. The database can be accessed via the Quantifying website. The second tool is a thorough quality assessment of Eurostat data on migration flows between countries that we made in collaboration with a team from the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research working on the Human Migration Database. The motivation behind this work lies in the need to clearly understand the reliability of data on migration flows in order to use them in migration models. This information is essential to deal with uncertainty in the prediction models developed in Quantifying, but beyond Quantifying, this tool can also be valuable for researchers working with Eurostat data. Eurostat coordinates data collection in Europe from national statistical offices and centralizes, compiles, and publishes this data in the form of country-level tables reporting immigration and emigration, often disaggregated by a series of variables. But the production of these cross-national data sets is challenging. Eurostat has made a great efforts to harmonize migration data, namely with the EU Regulation 2007 that ordered national statistical offices to employ common standards and definitions. Our data quality assessment thus offers an overview of the improvements in migration data since then. Based on several sources, we assessed the quality of migration flows data from Eurostat for a recent period from 2009 to 2019. To this end, we used objective criteria regarding the completeness and of the data and the comparability. Data completeness refers to the extent to which migration flows data are disaggregated by migrants' characteristics and to the amount of missing data in these categories. For modeling purposes, researchers would ideally have data on all migration flows by origin and destination, and moreover, models could be further enhanced if additional information exists on migrants' nationality, country of birth, sex, age. We evaluated the level of disaggregation and the amount of missing data for different migration flows for each European country year by year and produced a series of tables such as this one. This example shows the availability of immigration flows disaggregated by age and sex. Using a color scheme, we can easily visualize where and when data are complete in green, partially complete in orange, highly incomplete in red, or totally missing in black, as well as the percentage of completeness indicated by the numbers. We produced several tables such as this one for different migration flows and variables of disaggregation. The second group of issues relates to the extent to which migration data are comparable between countries. To evaluate this, we relied on 4 independent concepts also employed in previous projects such as IMEM. Duration refers to the criterion that a country uses to determine after which period of time a new resident can be considered an immigrant. Undercount refers to the part of the true migration flows that data collection systems fail to account for. The problem of undercount particularly concerns immigration, given that countries tend to have less strict reporting rules for people leaving the country. Coverage refers to the systematic bias resulting from data collection systems that by design do not capture certain groups of migrants, such as asylum seekers, diplomats, international students, etc. And finally, accuracy refers to the random errors stemming from the country's data collection system, with registers being generally considered more accurate than surveys. For each of these 4 concepts, we produce tables with detailed information by country, such as this one for undercount. This table gives information on the country's rules for registration of migrants and thus gives us an idea of how migrants may be over or undercounted in each country. The series of tables on data comparability allow the researchers to identify the potential problems in cross-national migration datasets and to adjust the data accordingly for use in migration models. These 2 tools developed in Quantmake, the data inventory and the data quality assessment, can be easily found on the project's website. We hope they will be useful resources for researchers and help them produce reliable quantitative analysis of migration in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'm Georgios Aristodelous, and I will be talking about estimation of migration flows between Europe and regions of the world. This work is part of Work Package 6.3 of the Quantifying project. Our aim is to obtain estimates of migration flows between the 32 EU countries and 8 rest of the world regions for the period 2009-2019, along with uncertainty. However, there are many difficulties inherent in estimating migration flows. For example, countries may use different definitions of migration. Now, most countries use a United Nations 12-month duration of stay definition. However, this was not always the case, and some countries still report using different duration criteria. Also, some countries exclude certain subgroups, such as refugees or asylum seekers, which should be counted, or fail to report some of the migrants. That is to say that migration is typically undercounted. Another issue is that countries may use different data collection techniques, for example, surveys or population registers, which means that the accuracy at which migration data are collected may vary with country. This is something we need to take into account. So the challenge is to harmonize these different measurements of migration in order to obtain coherent estimates of migration flows. To illustrate these issues, here is a small segment of the reported data on migration flows for some selected countries and the North America and Oceania region in 2009. It is in the form of what is called a double entry matrix. Each cell corresponds to a migration flow where the row is the origin and the column is the destination. A given flow can potentially have 2 reports, one by the sending and one by the receiving country. However, these 2 reports will not necessarily agree. For example, for the Italy to Spain flow, Italy reports sending around 4,500 migrants to Spain, whereas Spain reports receiving around 10,500 migrants from Italy, which is over twice as many. This highlights the issue of undercounting. In this case, it is Italy undercounting emigration. Another example, where the discrepancy is even larger, is flows from Slovakia to Italy, where Slovakia reports 62 emigrations and Italy more than 1,000 immigrations. One reason for this is that Slovakia uses a permanent definition for migration, where the individual should intend never to leave the destination country, whereas Italy uses the UN's 12-month definition. Note also that some countries do not report some or all of their flows. For example, Poland does not report any flows. Similarly, no flows are reported by any of the rest of the world regions, as seen by the example of North America and Oceania. This results in some flows only being reported once, such as the Poland to Italy flow, and some not at all, such as the Poland to North America and Oceania flow. Therefore, the objective is to correct for the inadequacies in the available data, reconcile the differences between reports of the same flow, provide estimations for flows that are completely missing. We do this using a Bayesian hierarchical model. This model is an extension of the model developed in the IMEM project. To give you the general idea of the model, I use a graphical representation. We assume that the true unobserved flows follow a model of migration, which relates the flow to drivers of migration, including economic, demographic, and geographic explanatory variables. The observed flows reported by the sending and receiving countries are assumed to be perturbed versions of these true flows. This perturbation is a result of bias and variance-inducing factors. For example, the definition of migration used by the reporting country, the extent of the undercount in the reporting of the flow. Those two are both bias-inducing factors. The level of accuracy of the data collection method used by the reporting country, which we assume excellent, good, and low. This is a variance-inducing factor, and sampling variability in the reported data. which is also a virus-inducing factor. I should note that the categorization of countries as far as the measurement of migration, that is duration of stay, definition used, extent of undercount and level of accuracy, was done as part of work undertaken in deliverable 6.2 from colleagues in NIDI. And also for the parameters related to the measurement of migration, we can introduce expert opinion in the model in the form of expert-specified prior distributions, which we elicited by conducting a Delphi survey as part of deliverable 6.1. To illustrate how the model performs, I will now present 3 examples of time series of migration flows. The first example is a flow from Italy to Spain. Notice that the figure, same as the other 2 figures to follow, presents the reported flow by the sending country in red, by the receiving country in blue, by those predicted by the migration model and those predicted by the migration model in green. Also presented is the posterior median and upper and lower 10th percentile of the true flow from our Bayesian hierarchical model, and those are in black. To note here is that Italy is a high undercount country and Spain is a low undercount, so the model accordingly corrects for this undercount. Also to note is that both countries record data with good accuracy, both are good registers, so the model gives more weight to trends in the data than the migration model. The next example is a flow from Spain to UK, where both countries report data, but one country, Spain, records with good accuracy, with a good register, while the other, UK, with low accuracy, as it uses a survey. Both are low undercount countries. Therefore, there are relatively small corrections for undercount, while the model gives more weight to trends in the Spanish data compared to the UK data. The final example is a flow from the North America and Oceania region to Spain. Here, data are only reported by Spain for some of the years. As already mentioned, Spain is a low undercount country and records with good accuracy. Therefore, for the years that Spanish data are available, the model, after applying a slight correction for undercount, gives more weight to the trends in the Spanish data than the migration model. However, for the years that no data are available, the model relies on the migration model estimation, while it also accounts for the additional uncertainty, as can be seen by the uncertainty bounds getting wider. To summarize, we have developed a model which produces harmonized probabilistic estimates for flows between European countries and regions of the world. It also provides coherent measures of uncertainty while combining a measurement model and a structural model. The model has also the ability to incorporate expert opinion by the use of expert-based prior distributions. As part of future work, we aim to extend the model so that estimated flows are further broken down by nationality or country of birth and age and sex. Finally, here are some references. The first reference is a link for the IMEP project database, where one can find references for the papers that describe the model. The second and third references respectively describe the Delphi survey of experts and the work done to categorize countries with respect to duration criteria, extent of undercount, and level of accuracy. Thank you.
In this video, I will talk about different ways to develop migration scenarios, with particular attention to Europe. This talk is based on work made within the Horizon 2020 project QuantMig, and it was conducted by myself, Michael Boissonneau, together with Rafael Costa and Helga de Valk. We can distinguish between qualitative and quantitative approaches to scenario building. Qualitative approaches often use scenario planning. In scenario planning exercises, experts come together to identify the 2 most important and uncertain drivers of change in a phenomenon of interest. Then, for each driver of change, they outline 2 probable directions of change. Finally, for each change in each driver, they elaborate narratives that describe change in the outcome of interest. So scenario planning results in different, equally valid visions of the future and is useful for improving decision-making under changing circumstances. This approach can be contrasted with quantitative approaches, such as projections. Projections usually use time series to make quantitative statements about the future. In such approaches, different scenarios correspond to different assumptions regarding the treatment of the data. Both approaches have their own advantages. Because it's not bound by data availability, scenario planning allows to explore a wider array of futures, including ones that have yet to materialize. On the other hand, projections allow to obtain quantified scenarios, which makes them easier to use and compare. While quantitative approaches to building migration scenarios have been around since at least the 60s, it's only in the later part of the 2000s that qualitative approaches, and more particularly scenario planning, started being applied to the problem of migration. The use of qualitative approaches has, however, become more widespread during the 2010s. Such qualitative migration scenarios were most of the time produced by large organizations such as the OECD, and most of the time concentrated on drivers' economic convergence and level of collaboration between countries. One question that has received little attention, however, is how to combine the qualitative and quantitative approaches at building migration scenarios. Such an endeavor would allow to profit from the explorative nature of scenario planning, while providing valuable information about the quantitative implications of the different scenarios. For example, if we knew that we are heading into a scenario of increasing political instability in a certain part of the world, and that such a scenario is likely to lead to large increases in the number of refugees, then policy actions can be taken to mitigate adverse consequences. We found two instances of such combinations in the literature. As a first example, Acosta Madiedo and colleagues report on the results of a workshop where experts use scenario planning to identify 4 scenarios of migration to Europe along the driver's economic convergence and level of international cooperation. Then, through means of a survey, the authors ask experts to express the consequences they expected from each scenario in terms of migrant numbers. However, this approach does not allow to determine the relative impact of each factor on migrant numbers. For example, it does not allow to determine how much of the change in the expected number of migrants is attributable to change in economic convergence compared to change in levels of international cooperation. As a second example, De Jong and Boissonneau identified plausible directions of change in a set of 6 drivers, and then asked experts to evaluate the potential impact on migration to Europe. However, this approach makes it difficult to tell how drivers may reinforce or cancel out each other and impact migration. For example, taken together, economic divergence and lower political stability can have a greater impact on migration flows than each taken separately. Considering this, as a second step in this Horizon 2020 project, we prepared a factorial survey experiment to estimate quantified migration scenarios between Europe and the Middle East and North Africa in the year 2030. The use of this type of survey entails the use of vignettes, which we use to form narratives describing changes in the demographic, cultural, political, and economic drivers of migration. For each driver, 2 directions of change are supposed. For example, a vignette is shown here that supposes for the Middle East and North Africa for the year 2030, a higher proportion of young people, decreased religious fundamentalism, lower political stability, and higher unemployment rates. For Europe, it assumes an acceleration of the increase in the proportion of old people, lower favorability to immigration, stricter immigration policies, and lower unemployment rates. In total, 128 vignettes were created that present unique combinations of change in each driver. By means of an online survey shown here, we are currently collecting data among experts about the implications of the content of the vignettes for the future number of family migrants, work migrants, refugees, and return migrants. The systematic variation in the content of the vignettes and the careful assignment of the different combinations of vignette to different experts allows it to establish a causal relationship between expert judgment and the drivers. Experts working within European research institutes and governmental and non-governmental organizations are welcome to participate to the survey. If you would like to participate, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Your opinion will be highly valued. Results will serve as input to projection models of migration to Europe, and they will form an enhanced tool for European migration policy. And the report presenting the results will be published in May 2022. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Barker, and this presentation is from QuantMig Work Package 9, which examines the uncertainty of migration across a range of time horizons by using insights from macroeconomics. Surprisingly, migration and macroeconomics are not topics that are frequently studied together in depth. To the empirical side, a lack of long migration time series data makes macroeconomic analysis more challenging. Still, a small number of theoretical models have introduced a macroeconomic perspective on migration which is useful for policymakers. This research uses empirical and dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, or DSG for short. With migration studies over varying time horizons comes uncertainty related to shocks such as the so-called asylum crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and policy changes that are not necessarily easy to forecast or model at an aggregate level. However, we can use methods to improve their analysis across countries. In the first part of this research, we look at forecasting migration flows to 26 of the 32 countries that were members of the European Common Market in 2019. And with the same dataset, we examine the effect of net migration shocks on the macroeconomy. The second part has two models and introduces a policy-relevant and upcoming topic of job automation, or how robots can take the jobs of human workers. In the first model, we look at endogenous migration between an Eastern European country, model on Poland, and Germany. In the second one, we analyse migration shock to Germany with a different automation scenario. The plots show the in-sample forecast of net migration in the 26 countries obtained by estimating panel vector autoregressive models, or VARs. As data isn't widely available for 2020, we focus the evaluation on the last 2 years of the sample period, so predicting 2018 to 19. In general, in terms of the actual errors, forecasts for immigration and emigration outperform those done for net migration, but we see that models perform relatively well overall. The long-range forecasts use conditional data for real GDP per capita and the size of the European Common Market. For the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we set the common market size to 0 to reflect that borders were largely closed. Here, we analyse the responses of other macroeconomic variables to migration shocks. For this analysis, we have 4 groups of countries which are separated based jointly on their migratory and macroeconomic profiles. Groups 1 and 2 are Western European countries, where Group 1 has a higher GDP per capita and higher net migration rate than Group 2. Group 3 is Central and Eastern European countries with positive net migration, and Group 4 has negative net migration. The responses shown on the graph are to a shock of a magnitude of 1 standard deviation increase to net immigration, or net emigration in the case of Group 4. GDP, private consumption, wages and salaries are variables in real per capita terms from the national accounts, and unemployment and employment are expressed in percentages. The axes are normalized across groups to reflect the magnitude of shocks. Increases to net emigration appear to be expansionary to the macroeconomy, while net emigration shocks are contractionary. In our research, we have also constructed 2 theoretical DSG models that examine the links between automation and migration. DSG models include 3 types of agents: households, firms, and a government. The households make utility-maximizing decisions, while firms make profit-maximizing decisions. Governments employ counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Our first model examines migration flows between the Eastern European economy, resembling the Polish one, and Germany, where robots are perfect substitutes to low-skilled native and migrant workers. The firm has an option to employ a robot or a worker. Increases to automation reduce migration flows. In the second model, workers aren't perfect substitutes for robots, only imperfect substitutes, and migration is entirely exogenous. This figure shows the input factors into production. In this model, there are 4 types of households: highly skilled natives, highly skilled migrants, low skilled natives, and low skilled migrants. Having highly and low skilled migrants allows us to look at the different role that automation can have on high and low skilled workers and natives versus migrants. Migrants at all skill levels experience brain waste compared to natives, but in this instance, low-skilled workers also face a threat from the automation of jobs. Studying in this way allows us to look at the wage inequalities that follow the different types of shocks. The impulse response functions shown on this slide indicate that migration shocks are expansionary, with high-scale migration shocks having a larger expansionary effect. Low-skilled workers are negatively affected with automation shocks. We've seen forecasting so far had limited success. The models are not perfect and cannot account for the uncertainty observed in migration flows. Where comparisons allow, the findings from forecasts are similar to existing research and provide an opportunity for further development. The empirical effects from net immigration shocks are expansionary to the macroeconomy, with increases to employment output and wages. This is supported by the theoretical DSG models. This isn't to say that everyone gains from net immigration shocks, but on a per capita basis, expansions are observed. DSG models aren't perfect, but they do allow us to look at the economy from a macroeconomic perspective with the micro foundations, whether migration is exogenous or endogenous, and explore a range of possible coherent future scenarios. They also allow us to consider automation, which traditional macroeconometric models wouldn't. The insights provide unique views into the future effects of migration. In terms of methodology, such theoretical models can also help shed light on migration uncertainty by examining different scenarios and reactions of different variables to migration, and vice versa. Migration and uncertainty go hand in hand, with uncertainty only increasing over further time horizons. We can make short-term assumptions, but over the long term we struggle. Our further research will look at early warning systems, which is another timely topic. Finally, 2 other deliverables from our work package are available through the Quantifying website. Additionally, there is a policy insight available through Population Europe. Thank you very much for your attention and for joining us this session. We very much look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the presenters for preparing the videos, and thanks to the organizers for putting them together so nicely. So may I start the, so even before we go into the discussion, just to follow up on what Michael was presenting, if anyone is interested in participating in the survey about the migration scenarios between Europe and North Africa, please get in touch with the NEDI team at quantmic@nedi.nl. I've posted the information on the chat as well. So I would like to start the discussion. Please do feel free to post questions on the chat. But we've got already the first question from Aris, which is sort of an excellent opener to the wider discussion, because we can situate this question in the context of the migration scenario setting more generally. So Aris's question is for all speakers: during this pandemic, we learn to be virtually mobile, going nowhere but being everywhere. And this trend may continue even if we can eradicate the pandemic. How will this trend affect the trend and pattern of migration? And will this virtual mobility, including remote offices, reduce migration? Shall we go in the order of presentation? So I would like to start with Matthias, and I was wondering what your reflections from the sort of theoretical and conceptual level angle are.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really nice intro into the discussion. I was just thinking about this term "going nowhere but being everywhere." I was thinking maybe it's just the other way around. We are nowhere, but we go everywhere, right? So in a way, we can join so many different, you know, platforms and fora and even conferences in India. But are we really there, right? Is the kind of presence being at the same place, the same virtually as it is in person? That was the first reflection actually when I saw your comment, Aris. Another reflection is basically I mean, it's a fundamental question. What does virtual mobility, what does virtual connectivity do to international mobility? I think from a conceptual perspective, now talking here in my role as the one who has presented the paper on decision making, I think it's key to understand what do decision makers expect to gain from physical mobility, and what do they only get through physical mobility and not through virtual mobility. If the two are relatively good substitutes, obviously they can easily trade the two, trade physical mobility against or by virtual mobility. The question is, does it deliver the same sort of output or outcome, right? What decision makers expect from the move from A to B and being connected to, you know, other people maybe, or opportunities at a place like B. So I think an assessment of that obviously is part of the decision-making process. And if the answer to that question, the two are relatively substitutable, then I would expect now in a kind of a scenario thinking process, because that will be a trend which I think we can be pretty confident on, that it will, you know, last beyond the COVID crisis. It will certainly have an impact on international mobility intensities, but also patterns, since we, I think, know that obviously still, you know, the virtual facility or facilities for virtual connectivities obviously are not evenly spread across the globe, though there's still obviously some aspects that need to be taken into account. It's not completely cost-free. That's what I want to make clear here, to be virtually mobile. But obviously it comes at lower costs, that's for sure. And so if the two are relatively, you know, substitutable, then I would answer this question basically by saying yes, we will certainly see you know, significant impacts on, we already see them, but also for the future, on migration intensities and outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks. This is something that really touches on a very salient topic, which, you know, was discussed at the conference yesterday in the panel session on migration, mobility, and COVID. You know, this is something that keeps recurring. I mean, moving on to other presenters, Valentina, from your perspective, you know, you have been looking at labor force survey data. Might there be any hints as to, you know, what we might be able to expect there?
Yes, like to reconnect to the paper, the first paper that I presented during this presentation, that like the bottom line was that uncertainty in policy negatively affect migration. I think that the COVID-19 crisis, like we see that there will be like decreased mobility and migration, because of course there are always new regulations. So maybe people like just postpone the decision to go somewhere in a second moment, or not move and stay home and working from home. On the other hand, I think that when the crisis will be over, for sure there will be an impact, but I don't think it will be so large, because like people continue to move not only for work. So maybe even if this trend continues to stay, like that you can work from everywhere, or you will have like online facilities, I think that people will continue to move for other reasons, like for example, for study, for like joining family member, or even like to flee climate change or wars. So I think that there will be an impact, but it will be like relative. So it will not like change completely the migration trend that we are seeing in these last years.
Thank you, and it sort of nicely segues into Hadron's talk, which was all about moving between categories, right, and types. Any insights from what you already found and what you presented in the paper?
Yes, thank you. So I think similarly that maybe it does not generally change that much, actually. I mean, generally not reduce, but change in the migration flows. Taking particular in mind on the results, what we say that there still may be category changes between migration flows. So when there might be restriction in one area just because of that on asylum, for example, that then rather they go into earned labor, that they rather than go through family. And this we already found now, and maybe this will be even stronger through the COVID as well. And as well, also, we found the spatial interconnectedness. So even if you see there's restriction in one country, it can have an effect on the neighboring country. So, and also taking into account the network's effect also beyond like the origin country. So not necessarily just reduce, but change.
Thanks. And in a sense, that's a really nice and quite comprehensive picture at the conceptual level. And I'd probably add to that, the famous work by Wilbur Zelinsky from the 1970s about mobility transition, in which he sort of foreseen a shift to teleworking and long-range communication as a possible substitute of mobility, but with big uncertainty. And now the question, I mean, the sort of moving on to Rafael and Georgios, sort of you discussed the data and estimates, right? From your points of view, if there are changes, if we are to observe changes, how will the instruments that we have at our disposal when it comes to data collection, how well will they be able to pick up what we're observing? I mean, Rafael, if you want to go first on that.
Yes, just one thing that comes to mind is I think it could be an additional obstacle for migration data if people start to work in another country where they actually have all their activities and spend their time. So I think well, distinguishing the de jure population and the de facto population could become more blurred because well, we see this already in the low countries. Well, they're small countries, but tax authorities, for example, are having a hard time seeing where people are actually working and spending their days, even if they are registered elsewhere. So I think this could be an additional challenge to see if if people really live where they are registered, if working from a distance becomes such a normal, standard way of working. Yes, I think this is the most important issue that I thought of.
Thanks, Georgios.
Hi. Regarding our models, more data or more detailed data it's always welcome, of course. But the models, the specific model, the estimation model that I'm working on is built to be flexible enough. So, for example, if for a given flow you have, let's say, full data availability in the sense of having data from both sending and receiving country, then the estimation will reflect that that availability. As far as uncertainty, it will be less uncertain. If not, the model now needs to borrow strength from the other flows and rely on what can be described as a default estimation of drive that comes from drivers of migration. But in case more data are available, then that will come into consideration. So in short, the models are flexible to handle more data.
Thanks, and in a sense, this is also a recurring topic. You know, the data availability and what data availability also at different frequencies, at different time granularity that might, you know, for picking up the processes such as, you know, the shift towards virtual reality during the pandemic. Shall we just conclude this round of questions by asking Michael and Emily from your points of view, so once we get to the scenario setting, what are your takes on the COVID mobility question?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think concerning our work package, so work package 7, I think the pandemic really highlights the usefulness of qualitative scenarios. So there is very well, so it's still unclear what the impact will be on migration, but in any quantitative model, it's really hard to take into account the impact of very unpredictable events like this one. But that's something you can do in principle with qualitative scenarios. So you can really explore the impact of unexpected events. Although we didn't take that into account in our in the specific work package because we wanted to focus on other things. But I think in the future, that's something that will enter qualitative scenarios more and more. So this kind of very disruptive events like pandemics.
Thanks, and Emily, you know, what's the macroeconomist's take on that?
So it's macro and the labour economist point of view, really. So a lot of the data that I've used in my research, I had to be careful with it because employment, for instance, is counted. You can use it as a domestic concept and also a national concept. And there's actually quite a bit of difference. So if I take Germany, for instance, there's at some points in time, about a difference of 3 million or up to 3 million, which is how they can, it's how the statistics become quite difficult to work with. And it is something that will probably cause more problems in macroeconomic modelling, as it's important to from both the sending country, as it were, but because you're no longer a sending country, because they're still living there but working, it can really create problems with the accuracy of models. So it's okay to do it in like the DSG models that I do because you can control it. So it's not quite a qualitative model, but you're getting there in a sense that you can easily control it, which isn't shown in the data. So there isn't a specific variable that you can accurately say, oh, the difference between people living there and not living there. So I could go on for a long time, but I know it's quite short. But yeah, it's really going to cause problems with the data, and I can't do it in a lot of my modeling because the data isn't there and I'm using past information. But it does a very interesting question, and also goes to the automation aspect that I've got. So high skill workers, they can remotely work, or quite a lot of them can. You think computers, software, we're all just literally here, we can do that, but the lower skill workers can't. So that a bit of my research comes into it, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's a big problem from a macro or labor perspective.
And that's an excellent point, Emily. You know, that we, you know, it's not a monolith, right? So we need to keep reminding ourselves that migration is not a monolith. That you know, you can look at across the skill spectrum, across the different types, as we have seen in the presentations, and the comments about data and lack of information, you know, make a very nice bridge to the comment by Nathan on the chat. You know, some people are uncomfortable with migration models due to the level of uncertainty in the underlying data. Have you experienced this skepticism too? And how do you address this skepticism with people outside of the research community? So, you know, with our clients, with the decision makers. I don't know if anyone wants to address that comment. Excellent comment, by the way.
I can just make a very quick example. Is the Netherlands. So as a macroeconomist, you'd find, or I found it very hard to explain that the Netherlands had negative net migration. So I go through all the Netherlands, it's a highly developed economy, it's got lots of pull factors. And then when a lot of the data says, I know there are reporting reasons for it, but it's how can the Netherlands have negative net migration? It didn't make any sense. So I had the problem of standing there and or not standing there, sitting behind a screen and explaining that yes, it was the case. And even the models from the IMEM project before, it caused such a issue in my own research that I just couldn't include it in the panel VAR model that I showed. So, and using the techniques I did, it wouldn't work for those. So skepticism and also dealing with people who are particularly opposed to it. So the populist political movement has created a lot of problems, and it's very difficult. But I thought I'd just get that in quickly with the Netherlands. And also before the Liechtenstein problem, they have visas that are specifically you can work in Liechtenstein but you can't live there type thing. So yeah, that was something else that I just thought of.
Thanks. And in a sense, they're just special cases, but they illustrate something broader. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that point.
Regarding uncertainty, I guess it's important that we have models that have a fair reflection of that. So that's the main thing. And then try to communicate this is, I guess, another question. But first, we need to make sure that we quantify it properly, and then communicate what we have quantified. So clarity and transparency, I would say, are also very important.
I think you're spot on there, and Matthias and I, we have been speaking at various policy events, trying to hammer home the message of uncertainty, which I think that was actually well received in policy circles. So I think that especially when you look into the sort of European decision making at the European Union's level, there is acknowledgement that okay, migration is uncertain. We need to do something about it. Last year, the new blueprint for preparedness and early warnings came out. So there is some shift in the thinking about uncertainty and what to do with it. And I think, as Georgios said, we as scientists, we have to be honest about what we can say and what we cannot say. This is the whole point of focusing on uncertainty in the project. But I think also maybe the pandemic has helped this way of thinking, because we have been living in a world that's very volatile and very uncertain for the past year and a half, and sort of this uncertainty cut through to the public discourse, which I think it also helps us relate to that experience when we talk about migration. Matthias, I don't know whether you might have anything to add from your perspective, given our sort of recent experiences with the policy engagement.
Yes, I mean, I certainly have experienced this kind of skepticism from different sides, not only from policymakers, and basically, I think it's good to have some healthy skepticism when it comes to future migration sort of projections and forecasts. I mean, we have seen today also in some of the presentations, right, how quickly confidence intervals become wider and wider when it comes to longer time horizons. So we have less confidence, basically, in saying anything reliable and robust about a longer time horizon when it comes to migration. So I think that's what also policymakers understand, that that it depends a lot on the time horizons that we are talking about. So I think when it comes to really short-term developments over the next couple of weeks or months, I think there the confidence intervals are relatively narrow. But when it comes to longer time horizons, it's quite different. And another point I would like to make here, which I think can give us more confidence also in when it comes to future projections, is that we understand the theory behind the models, right? That we understand what's realistically possible by knowing historical patterns of migration. What's realistic then also for the future to expect, and that I think gives us some kind of at least wide or outer boundaries in our assessment as migration scholars, and to assess whether some of the projections are realistic or not. And that's why Michael and his team are also doing this sort of expert-based assessments, because I think experts should know, migration experts should know at least a bit about the migration theory in order to assess what are realistic scenarios for the future when it comes to different contextual constellations.
Thank you. And I don't know if we have any other questions at the moment. Thanks Nathan for the nice comment. So just before we wrap up, because we just have we have 3 minutes to go in the session. Before we wrap up, shall we just go quickly around the table again with a quick question to everyone in one sentence? What's the main take-home message for the process of setting future migration scenarios from each of your individual perspectives? Matthias, would you like to go first?
Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. There's one more question by Mark Weldon. Is that correct?
Oh, sorry. Is it possible to repose the question to
so
everyone?
There must be. Maybe he has posted the question, but it isn't shown.
No, it's not a Q&A either. Okay. Mark, would you like to come in on with a question? It's all right. I think I know what's going on. It's Nathan's question wasn't related to everyone, which is what was causing the confusion. So I will repost it. Thanks Mark for pointing that out. So quickly for wrapping up, lessons learned. A single lesson learned for scenario setting for future migration. Matthias.
I mean, for me, as I just sort of emphasized, I think the starting point of any scenario analysis is sort of studying the history of migration, studying migration theory, understanding how migration works in general patterns, in order by that to inform any sort of methodological decisions taken on the design of methods on the future of migration, whether it's scenario analysis, whether it's forecasting, or other tools. So knowing the theory as a starting point into any future analysis of migration.
Thanks, Valentina.
From the point of view of my working package, I think that what we did that can be useful for our next scenarios is that we underlined the importance of some understudied topics like uncertainty in policy and attitudes. And also, like in the paper, we provide some quantification on how those things really affect migration. That I think it's important to having this kind of quantification.
Thanks. Hydra.
I think generally more coordination is needed between EU countries if one wants to effectively manage migration flows of all categories, keeping in mind that they are spatially and categorially interlinked.
Fantastic, thank you. Raphael.
Yeah, just briefly, from the point overview of data, I think, well, this is upstream work that is essential for migration scenarios. In our case, it's raw material for the work in the estimations of migration flows. And well, it shows again how important this work is if we want to have an idea of uncertainty also in the predictions, etc. Now, and just one word. This quality assessment was also had a Maciek Danko, who is also an attendee, had a very big role on that. So just a quick thank you for him.
Thanks, Georgios.
Yeah, my point is similar to Matthias's in the sense that before thinking about future scenarios, you kind of need a reliable representation of the present and the past, hence the need for estimation of migration for the present and past.
Fantastic.
Reliable estimates or data that are reliable, any of the two.
Thanks. Mikael. Any insights? You may be muted.
Sorry, we mentioned that yeah, the expert opinion can be used to palliate for the lack of data, and so we've been running this survey as we've been mentioning for now a couple of weeks, and I can tell that so far the reception is quite favorable, but there is still professionals, migration professionals, who are quite reluctant or who have yeah, reserves about that kind of surveys. And so there is maybe a work of, I don't know, convincing more people, more migration experts about the benefits, but maybe also it's, well, I think that how you conceive the survey and the design is really important also to make sure that you do it in a proper way. But yeah, for those who are listening, you can go and judge by yourself and participate to the survey as we already invited you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Emily.
Just continuing on Georgios's point a bit is how we need to look at what's already happened. So the most relevant example of mine is migration shocks, and particularly for the net emigration shocks is the potential expansion of the EU and how that will affect the countries joining. So all the potential candidate countries or the actual candidate countries, they have very large differences in the state of the macroeconomy, so such as wages and salaries being between 10 and 20% of the EU average. They're likely to experience outflows in the same way that Bulgaria and Romania have in particular, who are at the bottom end of that scale. And so what do they get from joining, and also what will they lose from joining as well? So they're also very important examples, as well as the net immigration shocks. So that should complete it.
Thank you. And my lesson is prepare to be surprised. I think this was about uncertainty in migration scenarios. Thank you very much to all the participants for joining us in this session, and for very stimulating comments and questions for the discussions. Many thanks again to all the presenters. Enjoy the rest of the program, and have a great afternoon or the rest of the day. Thank you very much.